Jaimie Hoffman will be talking now about creating an ecosystem that RISE, R-I-S-E, for online learners. She is the VP, the Vice President of Student Affairs for Noodle Partners. Dr. Jaimie Hoffman spent the first 15 years of her career in student affairs and services, which serves as the foundation for her experience and passion for making a difference in higher education. She has served as a full-time and adjunct faculty member and has taught face-to-face, blended, and online using synchronous and asynchronous technology courses.
Thank you, Michael, for the invitation. As you noted, my name is Jaimie. I use pronouns she, her, hers, and I am very honored to be with you, and couldn't help but feel how perfect the sequencing of these two sessions were, because some of the things that Charles noted, I think with the focus mainly on the curricular elements of the student experience, you might hopefully find are complemented by the presentation I'm giving today, primarily on the co-curricular elements of the student experience, with a very specific emphasis on engagement. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Here we go.
And I see it, it's loading up right now. I see it in presentation mode, so I'll step away completely now. Thank you.
Wonderful, well, thank you. So I already introduced myself, but you're welcome to take my email in the event that you did have any questions or just wanted to have a thought partner after the session today. And also wanted to honor the fact that while I don't want to add to the exhaustion, there's a significant amount of racial tension occurring in society right now, based on 400 years of violence and discrimination against Black people. My company has given us the day off, actually, so that we can spend time in reflection and to think about what we can do to use our privilege to make some sort of a difference, as well as to allow people who are affected in different ways to have the time to rest. So I don't feel like it would be appropriate without honoring and giving space to that. But wanted to move on here and then kind of help explain what the heck did I mean by RISE. I put that in the title, and I'll share a little bit more, but the sort of anchor point of this presentation to you is having you think about how do you measure the quality of the online student experience, notably the holistic ecosystem with which the student engages. How can you make sure that it is a vibrant, engaged student body? And Graham gave you a lot of thought pieces and ideas for notably inside of the classroom. And we have a rubric that has 4 components to it that helps to look and shed light on these different areas pertaining to a holistic ecosystem. Our engagement, the component of our engagement element of our rubric does unpack both curricular and co-curricular engagement. So I think it would be very interesting to kind of do an analysis and overlay of connecting the two presentations in that area. But I wanted to briefly spend a bit of time on the first 3. And then really the bulk of the information I have to share is pertaining to engagement. You'll notice that there's a link on the bottom of this slide. I have quite a few embedded links throughout, although I'm now like, wow, I didn't do a QR code. That would have been amazing too. But I will definitely share the deck before the session is over so that you all can click on these links, inclusive of accessing the RISE rubric. Because I think it is important for us to start thinking about moving beyond this idea of sort of emergency learning to what if we are online learning in a more sustainable way. And that really is the focus of my efforts and my team's efforts at Noodle Partners. We help universities put their programs online, and we have all sorts of work streams, including instructional design, which is actually how we are fortunate to be connected with Construct. But I oversee the student support element, where we have things like success coaches to align with the behavioral and affective that Charles was talking about. But with regard to our rubric, so these are the 4 elements. I'm going to pack each one on the following screens here. So first we have the idea of responsive. When we say responsive and that a university or community is responsive to student needs, what we mean is that they are responding to students in a timely manner. This actually depicts a real update that we gave to our university partners about our Success Coaches response times. We know that students who are online, notably, will often feel isolated, and they certainly can't go to the financial aid office if they're frustrated because they're not hearing back. And that can lead to frustration. And for students who are navigating, for instance, the college environment for the first time as first gen, not getting a response to a pivotal question could be that one thing that makes them say, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can continue on. So having some expectations for response times and how to then track their response time is very important to know what kind of services students are receiving. Along those lines, having escalation protocols so that whomever is answering the phone knows to whom to refer questions to very seamlessly, and ideally can transfer the phone, of course, over there. Some of those service-related elements that are important in businesses and on campus. Having frequently asked questions that are comprehensive and easily accessible, both to students and support personnel, is really important in this area. And also, there's an opportunity here, right, to leverage things like chat box that might be able to help answer some of those tier 1 questions or questions that are just very frequently asked that can then allow for staff time to focus on some of the more personalized responses that are required for students. The I in our rubric, the I, includes quite a few things pertaining to this idea of creating an ecosystem that is really inclusive of online learners. And what we mean by that is that on-ground faculty and staff are aware of the unique needs of online students. We mean that website language is accessible and inclusive of online students. So what you have here is a website. Actually, this was a presentation I gave, or a snippet of a presentation I gave to one of our university partners to help them think through their own language on their website. And this is quite a motivational, I think it was a vision statement that I took a snippet of. And you can see the end here says, when you walk through our doors, you'll feel passion and commitment. And we'll often see things on websites like, go to this office, come see me, I'm in building, blah, blah, blah. Well, the simple act of not acknowledging or including online students or students who are learning remotely in that language can feel quite symbolic, like you're not a part and that you're not included. So while we know that the review and revision of websites can be quite a lift, it's important to think about this and make a plan toward achieving it. Also thinking through how can students seamlessly schedule interactions with campus services. Can we get Calendly links set up, or Microsoft Teams, or whatever the product it is, but how can we make it as easy as possible so that they're not encountering additional barriers to get their support needed. Next, how can we make sure that there are varied modalities with which students can use to connect to campus personnel? So certainly Zoom, this presentation is a bit different now than it might have been a few months ago, because many of our campus partners weren't even comfortable using Zoom, and now probably many of them are pros. But making sure that that's transparent on websites, and I hope that the work that's been done during COVID actually sustains, because as you can imagine, and you might always already be thinking, if you make these adjustments to be inclusive of your online students, you are also then making more inclusivity to students who are commuting, who really couldn't come back to the campus to do some of their business. And also, you know, you have the students who are in the residence hall room and don't want to get out of there, but that's another topic. Also included here is looking at fees, making sure that the fees that are administered to online students, that they're receiving equitable support for those fees. We often see campuses saying, don't charge any fees to online students. And that's because they can't come on ground. And while I do understand and appreciate that, if you're really seeking to create an inclusive ecosystem, you would actually want to think about how can you transform all of your services, or as many as possible, to be inclusive and available to online students, or perhaps there are some services that you would simply adjust so that there are two different ways to access and achieve a similar outcome. And another component of inclusive is campus climate surveys. I have reviewed quite a few campus climate surveys, and I have yet to find, actually there is one that I've found that includes the online ecosystem. And I think that this is now more important now than ever, that we are thinking about online students and we are thinking about the climate of our online ecosystem. Is it accessible? Is it welcoming? And I'll talk more about that shortly. And then supportive. We have 3 buckets of support in our rubric pertaining to the different support services that might need to be available for online students. We have personal support, things like students needing to get access to the mental health services. Again, more important now than ever, but also more difficult now than ever, because on-campus counseling centers are really at capacity, and many of them are in a situation, right, where their counselors' licenses prohibit them from practicing mental health support with students out of state. So we need to spend specific attention toward that, and not, kind of move away from the issue, but move toward it. Things like disability services, veteran services, or in personal support, administrative support, things like making sure students can do all of their business online, submit a Title IX, confidential, notably, Title IX complaint, conduct all of their business, including getting an ID card. Why would they want that if they're not coming to campus? It's symbolic, right? You feel like a part of the community if you've got your ID card. And if you don't, what does that mean? Again, so we see some of the things that sometimes universities don't do, sending a message that they don't necessarily intend. And then we also have the element of academic support, and things that you might imagine in there that actually were already referred to in the previous presentation, such as tutoring, advising, and library services. So I'm going to move now to engaging. And I have a few more slides on this particular topic. But really, the idea here is to focus on making sure that there is a singular space, or at least spaces, that students, faculty, and staff can gather together and engage with each other on varied topics, inclusive of those that might be curricular based, like research interests, but also just those that might be social, like the hobby of hiking, let's say. This screenshot is actually from the Noodle Partners Slack community. We have, as you can see, a Build Community Slack channel, and this is taken from today. This is how we're really focusing in as a company and sharing resources and getting together to build community. And you'll hear me talking briefly in a few slides about the element of an idea of a virtual student union. I think it's important to mention that now, because on ground, student unions were created to be the living room of the campus, the place where everybody gets together, all of the individuals who are community members, to have these conversations. So it may be that, sort of tying in from the previous presentation, creating a virtual student might be that place to really foster the behavioral and affective elements of the student experience. So some of the elements of our co-curricular engagement and initiatives that we have on our rubric, and I'll allow you to kind of peruse it for more in-depth information, are these components here. So we have student organizations. We want to make sure that students can not only participate in student organizations, but they could create them as well. For student government, we want, again, to make sure that not only students can attend student government meetings, which again, because of COVID, we're seeing a lot more access in this area for students learning online. But we also want to make sure that there's a balance of representation. So we actually spend time with campuses talking with their student leaders about looking at their bylaws and making sure that the online student population is represented so that their voice has a place in the conversations. And of course, we want to make sure that online students are invited to participate in campus events where it makes sense. At times it doesn't make sense, right? And at times having online component can actually change the goals and outcomes of the on-ground event. And it's important to think through that and obviously continuously assess. So, but it is important to provide those opportunities, and time again, we find the more campuses make these relevant adjustments, they're seeing engagement in their events increase through participation from commuting students or students in their residence hall that don't want to move. Also, what's linked on this page, I just wanted to take a moment. I've done a variety of presentations over the last few months on social engagement, notably outside of the classroom, and have aggregated a whole host of synchronous and asynchronous ideas that I have seen others posting onto this particular Padlet board, which I'll share with you. These are all things that could be conducted in an online format. So narrowing in here to this concept of an online student union, and I interchange the virtual and online. I don't know how many of you have taken this time to think about the difference in wording, but I've recently reflected on it quite a bit. And to me, I sometimes associate not real as virtual, and this is real engagement. So I'm starting to try to change my language personally to use online or digital. So with that, here's the online student union and how we create it to kind of be a holding space for all of these different activities to be occurring, from resource sharing to live chats, to campus-wide connections, to having a channel that says, Ask Jaimie, and that's the one-stop shop to get all of your questions asked. Trust me, I'm not in all of our campuses' Slack channels as Ask Jaimie, but there is someone that is either in our Canvas discussion boards or the Slack channels holding that space to be able to answer questions. So I've seen a lot of dialogue in many of the Facebook groups, notably that I'm in, pertaining to selecting a platform for a virtual or online student union. And my main wish is that real time is spent deciding on what the goals are and what the priorities are for this platform, because it really does need to be sustainable beyond COVID, because students are going to appreciate having this space to dialogue with each other, and they're going to want to continue it. You're not gonna want to just shut down a Slack community. And maybe you will, but I suspect it would be a missed opportunity if you did. So the things that we recommend considering when it comes to choosing a platform is that it's frictionless or intuitive. It needs to be very easy for students, right? The more clicks, the less likely they are to go there. So it's important to think about that. You want to think about making sure that there is a dual modality for engagement, that there can be some sort of asynchronous connectivity, but also synchronous. We also know that our college students, I skipped one, but that's okay, I'll come back to the other one. We also know that our college students are accessing their learning experiences on online systems through their mobile apps. And so making sure that the platform you use is mobile friendly and easy to use on a mobile device, which isn't necessarily the case in my experience for many learning management systems, even those that are my favorite, or the one that's my favorite, which I won't digress here. So you want to think about the mobile functionality, also accessibility, right? And this is quite a challenge if you do veer out of the space of using a learning management system. And when I talk about learning management system, I mean, and we have done this, we have created a course in our LMS that we repurposed for being an online student union. And we facilitate it in the ways that I'll share in the next slide. So obviously many LMSs are built, I mean, they're built for learning, and so accessibility is typically vetted. When you look at other products, I'll include Slack. It's one that we're really excited about for the engagement experience, but we also acknowledge some of the limitations. They didn't create this for education. They do not have a WCAG 2.1 compliance yet, but say they will in 2021. And my understanding is that, you know, for us, that's a pretty big issue. And I would understand that is the same case for institutions of higher ed. So you want to think about that along with data security and privacy. And many of you might actually be employed within areas that do the kind of assessment for platforms and consider some of these topics. But I will, you know, just emphasize to be purposeful about this. And even just last night was engaged in a Facebook conversation about the accessibility of a particular product. And, you know, the reality is, if it's going to be the one place or the main place that you're engaging students outside of the classroom, all students need to have access to it, including those students with a screen reader. So definitely an important point to consider. This is something that I, again, will, you can look and digest in more depth at another time, but this is our initial assessment of 3 products that we have looked at for our online student union and the pros and cons, also what's included in the free plan, notably for Slack. It is a challenge that single sign-on, as well as the ability to authenticate and de-authenticate users, is not part of the free plan in Slack. So that pushes many campuses to really consider the pro plan, and then there's financial implications. So things to think about there, and I'll make this obviously available to you after to review. Some ideas on how to manage your community. We recommend some channels or pre-created discussion threads that are listed here. Great opportunity to help, especially online learners that may not know who else lives in Ventura County in Southern California. That's where I'm at. Just to put a Ventura County channel. We have a SoCal channel at Noodle Partners. That's just a place for us who are close to get together if we want to, or just talk about what's going on. And a lot of us have been checking in on our neighbors who live in LA, given some of the things that have been going on there. So think about that and the permissions, as well as making sure to create some community guidelines. I have some that are actually linked and shared out on some of our resource pages. But we emphasize the fact that the campus policies and student code of conduct applies in this space, just like it would online, to kind of account for and manage some of the concerns people have about student behavior. Also want to emphasize, I am seeing a ton of really creative marketing about digital or online events, but not always some of the same practices that we're employing on ground, inclusive of making sure that along with the beautiful image is text that is in the body of an actual post. But some of these other things that many of the folks on this call are probably used to infusing in your learning design, they also need to be in the digital marketing that we're seeing that's going out on social media and in other avenues. Making sure that there's the statement of, if students need accommodations, contact whatever office, so that live captioning can be prepared, or whatever else that students need can be accommodated for. Also, do please, keep in mind that folks from historically marginalized populations during COVID especially, but it's looking like that's going to extend, especially for California State University system going fully online. Going home isn't always that positive, so students may need additional support or one-to-one connectivity. They may have limits to internet access, which emphasizes the importance of mobile engagement. And finding a quiet location may be tough. So it might be important to kind of think and pause about whether you would require any synchronous engagement. I also have some slides here I'm going to move through relatively quickly because you can consume at your leisure later as you're thinking about, okay, how are we going to measure this? And truthfully, I originally had these slides first, but I flipped it. But of course, I would recommend to begin with the end in mind and think about how do we want to measure this? We We want to see students rate a 4 out of 5 on a feeling of sense of community in our programs. And we've backward matched our initiatives against those goals. So these are ways that you can measure student satisfaction with engagement opportunities, ways to measure curricular engagement, which I know was a focus of the previous presentation, ways to measure the effectiveness or at least engagement in co-curricular activities are listed here. And then ultimately not losing sight of the fact that there's an entire body of research, notably for folks who get their advanced degrees in student affairs or higher education. We're very familiar with the fact that the more connected students are to each other, to their faculty members, and to their university community, the more likely they're to persist to graduation, and more likely they are to say that their experience was great and then help to get other folks to come into the university setting. So I have a lot of resources. As I've mentioned, I've done a handful of presentations over the last few months that I've shared on this slide. And also there are opportunities beyond today for engagement. This is when I say I'm seeing all of these things that people are sharing, it is in these spaces. And last I'll mention that I will be launching with some of my colleagues a podcast to highlight some of the really innovative practices that I'm seeing among faculty and student affairs professionals, notably around engagement outside of the classroom.